All right, let's dive into this. We're taking a deep dive into the Baha'i perspective on freedom of speech and religious tolerance. Pretty relevant topics these days, right? Lots to unpack here. And who better to unpack it with?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, yeah, the Baha'i Faith is really interesting, especially when you look at how they view these topics. I mean, one of the core beliefs is this idea of the oneness of humanity, that we're all interconnected no matter what our backgrounds are or our beliefs.
Okay, so it's more than just like live and let live. It's like recognizing a deeper connection between everybody.
Exactly. And this idea of interconnectedness, it even goes for religion, too. Baha'is believe that all the major world religions, they all come from the same divine source, just like revealed over time. Like imagine a garden with all different kinds of flowers, right?
Yeah.
Each one is unique and beautiful in its own way,
Right.
but they're all drawing sustenance from the same sun and the same soil.
That's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
It makes you think about different faiths in a whole new way. So where does Baha'u'llah fit into this? He founded the Baha'i Faith, right?
Yes. Baha'u'llah is super important in all of this. He brought these teachings in the mid-1800s in his writings, all about unity and justice and love. It's all really essential for humanity to move forward, they say.
I'm picking up on this real theme of harmony and understanding, which brings us to one of the sources we have for this deep dive. It focuses on the Baha'i view of freedom of speech. There's this really powerful quote from Abdu'l-Baha.
Oh, yeah.
Where he says, freedom of speech is completely essential for progress. He even compares it to oxygen for the mind.
Wow, what an image. It really shows you how much importance the Baha'i Faith puts on freedom of expression. But it's not just about saying whatever you want, whenever you want. Baha'is believe that with that freedom, you got to use your speech responsibly and respectfully.
So it's not just about expressing yourself, but how you express yourself.
Exactly.
That's super relevant today, especially with all the stuff going on with social media. It's so easy to just fire off a tweet or a comment without really thinking about the effect your words can have.
You're so right. Baha'i teachings really encourage us to slow down and think before we speak, especially online. They would say to use words to build bridges, not walls.
Easier said than done these days, right? It feels like everyone is talking past each other, not really listening. And then you have this issue of censorship, which seems to be more and more common globally. How does that fit in with the Baha'i belief in freedom of expression?
That's a really good question, and it kind of brings up a tough spot. Like we said, Baha'is really believe in freedom of speech, but they also believe that you got to use that speech responsibly and constructively. Censorship is tricky because they believe that everyone should be able to search for the truth. And to them, truth is something that's revealed over time through all these different religious figures.
So it's like walking a tightrope between protecting free speech and making sure speech is used the right way. This is a lot to think about. Maybe we can look at a real-world example to help explain this better.
Yeah, good idea. Let's look at what's happening with Baha'is in Iran. They're facing a lot of persecution. It's really hard for them to practice their religion freely and express their beliefs.
Wow.
But even with all of that, they still advocate for everyone to have freedom of speech, even people who don't agree with them.
That's pretty powerful, putting their beliefs into action even when it's really hard.
Exactly. Baha'is believe that if you try to silence people, even people you don't agree with, you actually make it harder to find the truth.
So open dialogue and the search for truth, that seems to be a core part of the Baha'i teachings. Which takes us to another big idea in our source material, religious tolerance. But from what you're saying, it's more than just putting up with other people's beliefs. It's about really engaging with other faiths.
Yeah, you're picking up on a subtle but really important part of the Baha'i teachings. They think that all religions, they teach the same basic truths at their heart, just in different ways. They believe in something they call interfaith dialogue. It's where people from all different backgrounds come together, not to argue or try to convert each other, but to find common ground and learn from one another. It's all about building understanding and respect, recognizing that we're all human, even though we might have different beliefs.
That's really interesting. So it's more than just you do your thing and I'll do mine. It's about looking for opportunities to learn and grow together.
Exactly. And the Baha'i Faith sees this interfaith dialogue as a really important part of world peace. They think that when people don't understand or respect each other's beliefs, that's when you get conflict and persecution. And that's a huge roadblock to a more peaceful world.
Yeah, you can see that throughout history. When people don't get along because of their beliefs, things can get really bad.
Exactly. And we're seeing that kind of intolerance and division popping up again in lots of places. So this Baha'i idea of religious tolerance isn't just some nice thought. It's a call to action.
So it's not enough to just talk the talk. We got to figure out how to walk the walk. But that's something we can dive into more in the next part of our deep dive. We were just talking about how important it is for the Baha'i Faith to have this active engagement and understanding between different religions. But it feels even more powerful when you consider the persecution that Baha'is themselves have faced.
You're right, it really highlights this important point. What's happened to the Baha'is, especially in Iran, really shows you what happens when you don't have religious tolerance. Talking about principles is one thing, but seeing what happens when they're not there is really different.
Can you talk more about the specific ways Baha'is have been persecuted in Iran? It's really important to understand the real-world impact of all of this.
Yeah, it's been a systematic thing, really multifaceted. Baha'is in Iran can't go to certain universities, they're barred from certain jobs, and often they face discrimination in the economy. They've had their cemeteries desecrated, their holy places destroyed, and community leaders imprisoned. Some have even been executed. Imagine living every day with the fear that just practicing your faith could put you in such danger.
It's hard to believe that this kind of oppression is still happening in the 21st century, especially when you think about how many countries, Iran included, say they support freedom of religion and belief.
It really shows the gap between words and actions. What's happened to the Baha'is shows us that just talking about religious tolerance isn't enough. We have to work hard to make sure that everyone can practice their faith without being afraid.
It feels like a call to action for all of us. But beyond fighting for their rights, what can we learn from how the Baha'i community has reacted to all of this?
The Baha'i response to all this persecution is a powerful example of resilience and forgiveness. They've been oppressed for decades, but they still believe in nonviolence and peace. They haven't turned to hate or revenge, even though that would be understandable. Instead, they keep fighting for unity and understanding, even for the people who are persecuting them.
That's amazing. They really believe in their principles, even when it's incredibly hard. It seems like the opposite of how a lot of people would react.
It says a lot about their faith and their belief that justice and unity will win in the end. They see this persecution as a challenge to stay true to what they believe in, even when things are really bad.
It reminds us that sometimes doing the right thing means having to sacrifice. But it's worth it if it helps make the world a better, more compassionate place. Their strength in the face of all this is truly inspiring.
It makes us think about our own commitment to these principles. Would we speak up against injustice, even when it's scary? Would we stand with those who are being persecuted for their beliefs, even if those beliefs are different from ours?
Those are tough questions to ask ourselves. It's easy to be all for tolerance and freedom when you're not the one being oppressed. What's happened to the Baha'is reminds us that it's when things are hard that we really see how committed we are to those principles.
It shows our true colors. Do we just sit back and watch, or do we stand up and fight for justice and understanding? What the Baha'i community has done and how strong they've stayed is a powerful example for all of us. Their story isn't just about their own struggle. It's about how hopeful and strong the human spirit can be, even in the darkest of times.
You've given us a lot to think about. The Baha'i perspective on freedom of speech and religious tolerance isn't just an idea, it's something they live every day. It shows how strong their faith is and how resilient they are.
And it's a challenge to all of us to think about what we can do to make the world a more just and peaceful place. How can we live these principles in our own lives, and how we treat others and in our communities? These are the important questions we need to ask ourselves going forward.
So we've talked about all these big ideas, freedom of speech, religious tolerance, and how important it is for everyone to be united. But honestly, it's a little overwhelming. How do we actually live out these Baha'i principles in our everyday lives? I mean, the world feels so divided right now.
Yeah, I get it. It can be hard to see how to turn these big ideas into actions, especially when things feel so chaotic. But the important thing to remember is that change starts with each of us. We don't have to solve every problem in the world all at once. Even small changes can add up and make a difference.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. So where do we even start? What are some practical things we can do to actually bring these Baha'i principles into our daily lives?
Well, I think a really good first step is to try and be more curious and open-minded. Instead of just sticking to our own little bubbles and only listening to people we already agree with, we should actively look for different perspectives, especially ones that challenge us.
That sounds like a good place to begin. But that's easier said than done, right? How do you have those tough conversations, especially when it feels like everyone is so polarized? It seems like every discussion just turns into a fight.
You're not wrong. Respectful dialogue is definitely hard to come by these days. But it's a skill, and like any skill, we can get better at it. The next time you find yourself disagreeing with someone, Instead of jumping right into an argument, try really listening to what they have to say, even if you don't agree at all. Ask questions to understand better, and really try to see things from their point of view. You might be surprised by what you learn.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's so easy to get caught up in your own opinions and forget to actually listen. But even if you're listening, that feels like just the first step. How do you go beyond that, bridge those gaps, and find common ground?
One good strategy is to try and find shared values or goals, even when you don't agree on everything. The Baha'i teachings always come back to this idea that we're all part of one human family, even if we have different beliefs and opinions. We all share this planet, and we all want a better future for ourselves and the people who come after us, right?
Yeah.
Focusing on those things that we have in common can be a really powerful way to start building understanding.
It's about remembering we're all human, even when it's hard. Are there other specific things we can do to put these principles into action? What about doing things in our own communities?
Of course. Getting involved in your community is a really tangible way to make a difference. You could volunteer with an organization that works with different faiths, participate in community dialogues, or support policies that promote tolerance and understanding. Even just talking about these issues with your friends and family can help plant the seeds for change.
I like those ideas. It's good to remember that we can all play a part in making things better, even in small ways. But it still feels like prejudice and intolerance are so ingrained in society. How can we create real change on a bigger level?
That's where the Baha'i focus on education comes in. Baha'is believe that education is the key to changing hearts and minds. It's about giving people the tools to think critically, to challenge prejudice, and to celebrate the fact that we're all different.
So it's about teaching the next generation to value tolerance, respect, and understanding.
Yes, it's about helping them see that our differences are what make us strong, not what divides us. And it's not just about teaching kids. It's about all of us continuing to learn throughout our lives. We have to keep challenging our own biases and being open to new ideas. That commitment to always learning is essential if we want to build a more just and equal world.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. The Baha'i perspective on freedom of speech and religious tolerance gives us a lot to think about, especially with all the challenges in the world right now. It's not just about protecting individual rights. It's about creating a society where everyone feels like they belong, like they're respected, and like they can use their unique talents and perspectives to make a difference.
You've really captured the spirit of the Baha'i teachings. They remind us that we're stronger together, not weaker because of our differences. When we embrace those differences and work together, we can achieve amazing things.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Baha'i perspective on freedom of speech and religious tolerance. We've covered a lot of ground, from the basic principles of the faith to the real challenges they've faced, and we've talked about how we can all use these teachings in our own lives.
We hope this has given you some food for thought. Keep having those thoughtful conversations with people from all walks of life, and think about how you can be a force for justice and understanding in your own community.
Remember, even small acts of kindness and compassion can have a big impact, and they help create a world that's more harmonious and just for everyone. Until next time, keep exploring and keep the conversation going.